Hey, good people, this is your Enneagram, back with another YouTube reflection. And this is a personal journal for contemplative people looking to think, grow, and have impact in the world. So, hey, this is actually part two. In part one, I started off by saying I just listened to some content from the personality hacker about polarities in the judging function. I've been in this space where I've been really questioning how I show up, how I do intimacy with people, and been very interested in how my judging functions as an INTJ, TE, and FI have an impact on how I do intimacy. And so I talked about that in part one, but that was the reason why I went to listen to the personality hacker, because I had consumed this content from them a few years ago. And so in the last week or so, I was like, you need to, in order to really interrogate how you're doing intimacy by way of these judging functions, or how your intimacy is being impacted by these judging functions, you need to go back and learn. You need to go and learn more about the polarities. And really, there was not a lot of good information out there. And then it was like, oh, but Personality Hacker did an episode. So I had to spend a lot of time finding it, but I did. So anyway, I found that, and I connected it to this wondering that I'm having around my approach to intimacy. But the episode did not answer that question, but it did give me a really nice framework to ask some different questions. Sometimes we can't get an answer to something because we keep asking the same questions. So the episode, while it didn't answer the question, it did give me some new questions to consider. So go to part one if you want to know more about that. Now in part two, I want to just kind of talk about some of the nuggets that came from that episode, just something that I thought were I just wanted to talk about. And so that's what I'm here to do. But if you're new to this project, this is a personal journal where I process my inner and my outer worlds. I do so by using personality theory, the two theories that I use the most, and the Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram, pushing those two systems together. I identify as an INTJ 8. I have a number of other disclaimers that I'd skip in the YouTube reflection because it's only 15 minutes. But if you want to know more about those other disclaimers or me, you can go to my website, yourinidom.wordpress.com, or my long form reflection podcast, Your NI All I want you to know for now is that this project is unedited, it's unscripted. All right? Okay. So, I think there were two major things that I was struck by. I listened to half of that episode 4 times. So in the first half, they spent a lot of time talking about the FETI polarity, which was good. They were about 40 minutes in that episode. Then I feel like they only gave about 20 minutes for the, maybe 30 minutes for the TEFI. So I felt a little cheated. But anywho, there were two major themes that really caught my attention. But I love this discussion around behavior and movement and action. And let's see, I don't have my notes in front of me. But let me see if I can get this correctly. The TIFE is interested in the pureness of thought. And the purer the thought is, the purer the behavior will be, or the greater value the behavior will be, but there's this relationship between thought and behavior, but the emphasis starts with the thought. And then the behavior is a byproduct of the thought, of the thinking. But for TEFI, if I have it right, it's reversed. That the purer the thought, the more effective an impact of the behavior is an indicator of the effectiveness or I don't know the word, purity of the thought, or the effectiveness of the thought, or the value of the thought, or the robustness of the thought. So where TIFE focuses on the thinking and the behavior is a byproduct, TEFI focuses on the behavior because of an outcome. And then the thinking is a byproduct. That doesn't feel right. But anyway, that caught my attention. And I now need to go back and listen to it because I feel like I'm not explaining it right. But anywho, so that was what that. And why I appreciated that is because as an 8 in the Enneagram, being a part of the body cluster, I'm very comfortable with taking action. And that theory says that the 8 is more instinctual. And that feels contrary to being an INTJ because I'm a careful thinker. So putting those two together, it's always been like tough for me. So the way I've reconciled that is by saying, in areas that I've already done a lot of careful thinking, I am instinctual. In areas that I might have a feeling to take action, I will be slow to take action because I have to go do some more learning. And I think that's a fair assessment. And I think because I've been in my industry for 30 years, so in my work life, it looks like I'm extremely instinctual, which isn't completely true. It's just that I have years and years and years and years of studying the thing, and I know the relationship between input and output, and I can take action fairly quickly. I mean, fairly quickly. But I don't take that kind of action in my personal life, which I think is a problem, So there's that. And so does that mean I'm not an 8 in my personal life? Not at all. Because as an 8, I'm a social self-preservation 8. But as I've gotten older, the self-preservation side of me is really strong. It's very strong at the personal level. See, professionally, I'm still social first. But as I get older, the more I move into my personal space, the more I move into self-preservation. When I was younger, I was social in my work and social in my personal. I've never made that distinction till now. God, I love when I can get on this podcast and make these discoveries. But anywho, so I semi-identify as a behaviorist in my work. Now, in the theories that I've built, I don't center behaviorism because there are a lot of limitations with the theory of behaviorism as it relates to long-term learning. But when I'm on the practice side of my work, I've spent a lot of time focusing on behaviors. I use behaviors to help me to understand the needs of learners, and I use behaviors to help me to guide the learning process. And I can be so focused on behaviors and scripted with behaviors when I'm trying to get a particular result. And it works. But sometimes when I'm doing it with an audience, so right now I'm sharing a classroom with someone, and I know that he's not fully in agreement with it. And it's a little bit cringy for me because I'm not fully in agreement with being as behavioral as I am. But when I'm working with a new group of students and I'm trying to show them that they have the potential of being more than historically they've been allowed to be, right? Because by the time they come to me in middle school, they've already experienced what schooling has for them. So they show up in a particular way. So for me to undo that, I then become very prescriptive in their behaviors so that they can see, oh, there's something else inside of me. Once they see that, then I nurture it and I become less scripted in their behaviors. So the gentleman that's sharing that classroom with me, he's going to eventually see that if I'm there long enough, because I'm doing some like limited term work in these schools. So I'm not making the long-term investment of time as I've done in earlier parts of my career. But anyway, just as I was listening to that episode, just thinking about TEFI, just this whole relationship with behavior and movement, that just resonated with me. That's all I wanted to say about that. The other thing that resonated with me that I'm going to have to go and flesh out a little more when I get on the podcast, when I record tomorrow, because it's just going to take longer. So I'm going to try it in the remaining few minutes that I have, is this relationship between FI and TE. TE is focused on production, and FI is focused on being. And yes. Like, I understand both of those clearly. I overstand it. And so, as I was saying in part one, most of my life has been focused on production. I've produced big things in the world. And now, big production is part of my identity. See, before it was just a part of my wiring. I just did it because it was just what was in me to do. But now my ego is attached to that. And so, and I'm not saying this is a good thing. It's something I'm trying to wrestle with. Because now that I'm older, FI has blossomed. And I hit a place about 10 years ago where, like, I'm tired of producing. I don't have to produce to show my value. I just am. I wrote a couple of poems about it. I've talked about it in my primary podcast and my secondary podcast. And so I just really appreciated hearing the juxtaposition between those two, producing and being. And what I've been trying to do also lately is to study grave spiral dynamics. And that's just a theory that I don't have a good handle on it. But what I think I know about it is that it really explains the personality of society at different stages throughout time, throughout history. And I believe I'm in a society and a culture that is unwilling to be vulnerable. And I understand why. Historically, there's a reason why we have to protect ourselves from that vulnerability. I don't want to get into the history of slavery and this long-term impact, but that's very real. And so there's a culture that grew out of that really is not as connected to vulnerability. And it's all about production and showing and producing. So that this part of me that's blossomed over the last 10 years of being and trying to be more comfortable with being vulnerable and trying to have intimate relationships that allow for vulnerability, it has been, excuse my language, it has been a nightmare or a shit show. It really has been. So I got to end it here. There's just so much to consider, so many questions that I have. But I think that this conversation about the polarity between TE and FI is valid. And I'm glad I went and found and looked that episode. I'm going to spend some time with it because I'm not done producing, but I'm no longer going to produce at the detriment of my individual self, which is what I did in the past. I'm no longer going to do that. And I'm no longer going to pretend like I'm non-human, like I don't have sensibilities and I'm not vulnerability. I don't have any vulnerabilities. I'm not interested in doing that because I'm strong enough to acknowledge that I am vulnerable. And I don't want to have any relationships anymore where I have to pretend to be like a superhuman, high producing. I don't want to do that anymore. So does that mean I'm becoming less of an INTJ? I don't think so. I think hopefully it just means I'm maturing. But maybe when somebody listens to this, they'll come back and go, "You're not really an INTJ." Whatever. But anyway, I want to just continue to send out a thank you to Personality Hacker for doing the good work that you do. And yeah. Hey, you guys, if this reflection has had any value for you, please give it a heart, thumbs up, or a like. If my conversation about the TEFI polarity and how it shows up in work or intimacy, if that connects to a conversation you've had in the world, please take this link and share with those participants if my moving about has caused some randomness in you. I would love to hear it. You can find me on my website at yourinidom.wordpress.com. All right, or go to my podcast, You're an Idom. You guys, it's been a pleasure hanging out with you until I come back. Be well. Bye.